Good evening. I'm Max Rudin, President and Publisher of Library of America, and welcome to LOA Live. Library of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to publishing authoritative new volumes of great American writers and to keeping the many-voiced American literary tradition a vital part of our culture. A special welcome to Library of America fellows and members who support our mission. 2022 is Library of America's 40th anniversary year, which we're celebrating with special events like this one. Please check our website, loa.org, for updates. Speaking of anniversaries, tonight's program celebrates the 125th anniversary of the birth of Thornton Wilder this spring. His work is published in 3 volumes in the Library of America: The Bridge of San Luis Rey and Other Novels, volume number 194 in the series; The Eighth Day, Theophilus North and Autobiographical Writings, number 224 in the series, published with support from the Agnes Gunn Foundation; and Collected Plays and Writings on Theater, volume 172, which includes Our Town, the inspiration for tonight's program. Collected Plays is kept in print by a gift from the Sidney J. Weinberg Jr. Foundation to the Guardians of American Letters Fund. Thanks to their generosity, the volume stands as a lasting testimony to Wilder's extraordinary achievement. Bridge of San Luis Rey has just been endowed by George Burwasser in memory of his late wife, Suzanne, and The Eighth Day, Theophilus North and Autobiographical Writings is still available for adoption. Links to these books will be dropped in the chat. The LOA Wilder edition was made possible through a partnership with the Thornton Wilder Estate and Tappan Wilder, the playwright's nephew, literary executor, and deeply knowledgeable, devoted, and resourceful champion who joins us tonight from his home in Sausalito, California. Special thanks to our partners for the program tonight: the Association of Literary Scholars, Critics, and Writers, Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, Concord Theatricals, Miami New Drama, the NYU Skirball Center, the Thornton Wilder Estate and Wilder 125, and the Writers Guild Foundation. Edward Albee called Our Town the finest American play ever written. First staged in 1938, it is one of the most produced works in the American repertory. There are, on average, more than 300 productions in the US and Canada every year, and dozens more throughout the world. Recent ones have appeared in Sri Lanka, Australia, Lithuania, China, Germany, Russia, Greece, Japan, and Hungary. A trilingual production in English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole, conceived in Miami, opened this past January in Dallas as Our Town, Nuestro Pueblo. In 2017, following the suicide bombing at the Manchester Arena in Northern England, Manchester's Royal Exchange Theatre mounted Wilder's play in memory of those who died. How is it that this quintessentially American masterpiece continues to resonate so profoundly across barriers of time, culture, and language, in places where both our and town mean radically different things? What pulls audiences and actors and directors back to it again and again throughout their lives and careers? To explore these and other questions, we are incredibly fortunate to have 2 distinguished guests join Tappan Wilder this evening. Michel Hausmann is co-founder and artistic director of Miami New Drama. A 2021 Drama League Award winner, he conceived, produced, and directed a trilingual production of Our Town. He joins us from Miami. Julie Betancourt-Deer is associate professor at Sorbonne University, where she teaches literature, translation, and acting. Her French translation of Our Town was the basis of a 2014 production in Limoges and is published by L'Arche. She joins us from Beaucouset in the Loire Valley, which she says is the French version of Grover's Corners. A reminder that we invite your questions and comments. The Q&A button is on your menu bar. Please let us know where you're viewing from. And now, please welcome Julie Betancourt-Deer, Michel Hausmann, and Tappan Wilder. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Let me start things off with a question for Michelle and Julie, and then I want to pivot to Tappan, but to say just to tell us how you came to discover and to know this play, and then what inspired your production, the productions that you were involved in.
Julie, do you want to?
Julie, you can start. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm happy to start. Good evening, and it's wonderful to be here. I discovered Our Town when I was 15, and I was an exchange student in the US. And I had a wonderful English professor who showed us, I think must have been a PBS production. And up to then, I had mostly been to the theater to see plays in French verse. So to me, seeing this very colloquial, very everyday American play was so very striking. It really stuck with me. And maybe 5-6 years later, when I was doing my master's, I had to find a play to translate. And I remembered some lines from Our Town, except I didn't have the text and I wasn't sure what play it was. So I read through Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, until I found Our Town, and I knew that this is what I wanted to translate. And so I translated the play, and when it was produced, I was very happy to be involved in the production and go and speak to the actors about the relevance of the play to today and to France today.
So Michelle, why Our Town? What inspired how did you learn about the play? How did you first discover it? And why did you choose to mount this production, trilingual production?
I always say that the best thing about being an immigrant is that I wasn't exposed to Our Town in high school. But I came, actually when I was doing my master's, I've heard about Our Town, but I never actually read it until I think my early 30s. And as I was reading it, I was like, wait, this can't be this good, can it? And then it kept getting better, and I was like, it might be the best American play ever written, period. I completely came across with a very honest relation with the text, nothing about high school productions, none of that. This is as good as theater gets, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I knew I wanted to do a production of it once I started my theater company in Miami, and I felt that the play was so whole that it could allow to do what I very bravely approached the great Tappan Wilder, and I asked him if he would allow me to translate certain sections so that one family would speak in Spanish, the other family would speak, the gift would speak a mix of Haitian Creole and a little bit of English, and everybody else in the town would speak English. And the generosity of this man really allowed this production to happen. And I think it was a great investigation about, not only the universality of Our Town, but, also, you have to go back to the year 2017, and, the sentence, "Make America Great Again," was in the air. And there was a lot of this fake nostalgia about a moment in time in America where things were perfect, right? And so, that Grover's Corner might have been cast in that light by lesser minds, I think, but in reality, it's au contraire. I think that this experience with Our Town allowed the universality of Thornton Wilder to come out. He wasn't writing, obviously, about a small town in New England. He was writing about what it is to be alive, and there is no language barrier to that experience. And that was the thesis going into, and I think that the show proved itself to be just that.
Well, Tappy, to that point, I mean, Grover's Corners itself is in the play is a pretty homogeneous place, as we know from Professor Willard. Uh, and, um, and yet from the beginning, the play has had this extraordinary appeal for people who don't talk in English and don't even want to channel Mrs. Gibbs. Which is one of your subjects, right? And so it's really been true from the very beginning, isn't that so?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Grover's Corners has been an offshore address very early on. When I was thank you very much for asking me to be here. I pulled together just a little talk to help me understand the subject, Max, you know. So I could try out a few words on everybody. In fact, I'm just going to do it, right? So here was my uncle, even before the play opened. He says, the play, he's a reporter's asking, what's this play about, Wilder? This play, you might say, it's a kind of an attempt at a complete immersion into everything about a New Hampshire village, which I hope will gradually be felt by the audience to be an allegorical representation of all life. And then, you know, among the records that I get to fuss around with, so here's some dates. The play opens in New York on the 4th of February, 1938. And the first sale of rights agreements is about 4 months later for Scandinavian and Finnish. And soon productions are happening there. In February 1939, the first Polish edition of production appears in Warsaw. The next month, March 1939, we're at the Schauspielhaus in Vienna, a really very important production. Then in April, we're in Rome. In July 1939, the play is published for the first time in Japan. And there are productions in 1941 by groups. One of them ends very successfully about 3 or 4 weeks before Pearl Harbor. Then we have this, and the French, and after the war, very complex subject, which we have the USIA adopting it and pushing it out, of course, around the world as part of their Cold War attempt to deal with our representation of American values. And it's absolutely fascinating to me, especially it become very important in Germany and the German-speaking stage. I noticed just rereading Mark Robinson's wonderful book on the American theater, that he starts his iconic discussion of Wilder in Darmstadt, Germany in 1946, not in a little town in Dubuque, not on Broadway. He starts in Germany with people wrapped in blankets, listening to, in this case, The Skin of Our Teeth and Our Town. The two plays are almost similar. And I'm going to end this.
And that's still true, right? I mean, that is to say, you get requests for productions around the world every day, every week, right?
I'm Max. Here's the line. What happened last week? Here's the report. These are the rights we're dealing with: Czechoslovakia, Ecuador, Hungary, Japan, Portugal, Serbia, Spain, and China. That's as of last week. And you know, I think that's enough to say that this has been an international play from the beginning. It's a fascinating subject, and it goes on, and it ain't over.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fascinating. And I want to pick up on something that you said. You talked about, you connected the universality of the play, the way it translates to this idea, to Wilder's idea of allegory and or the allegorical quality of it. And I just wanted to push that a little bit because, I mean, one thing that Wilder said about the play, about the theater, he says, the theater longs to represent the symbols of things, not the things themselves. And in pursuit of that, I mean, the stage, the very experimental stagecraft of this play was meant in some ways to help with that. And I wanted to ask you guys about that. You you know, it's a very experimental, avant-garde approach to mounting a play, right? It's a bare stage. One theater critic has said that the staging is so radical that more than 80 years after the Broadway opening, we're still catching up with it. And I wonder, you know, is that true? I mean, do you see that as true? I mean, what's radical about the play, and what challenge does that pose for the director, you know, I mean, talk about that a little bit. I mean, do you see it as a challenge? Maybe you don't. Maybe it seems more domesticated now than it did in 1938. Michelle, you have a thought about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I think that in general, the American theater has, you know, suffers from the illness of the kitchen drama sink. You know, if you go to Broadway or you go to, you know, you always see this extremely realistic sets. And I kind of feel that's an American thing. You know, sometimes you go in different countries, theater is more, but in the American theater, audience want to see the reality, right? And I think Thornton Wilder was never interested in that. He understood that the power of theater relies on the imagination of the audience. It's just such a simple thing. The Greeks, like those who invented theater, they knew that. You know, there was no set. There was no. The audience is not stupid. The audience can fill in the blank, and the moment that they are filling in the blank, they become complicit in the theatrical experience. And I think Wilder understood that and made, you know, the play about the essential, about the moments, about the relationship, about the humanity, without any things that would distract you. And I think that the only thing shocking about it is that other American writers didn't pick up on that cue. And we still have today, you know, so many plays with unnecessary elaborate sets that are not there, you know, to tell the story, but to remind, you know, to remind the audience that they are in this space that is trying to imitate reality instead of in a real theatrical space.
Yes, yes. Julie, how did the French production in Limousin Theater that was based on your translation, how did they approach that aspect of the play?
They made it perhaps even more challenging by having only 6 people on stage, 5 actors and a musician, I think for budget reasons to begin with, but it worked very well. It was even more meta-theatrical. The actors had little tables on stage, on the sides of the stage, as if they were in their own dressing room, and then they would get up and perform a part and then go back to their little dressing room area. And it really worked as actors who were gathering to tell a story about America. Picking up on what Michelle was saying, I would tend to say also that Wilder is not just perhaps the father of a less dominant trend of American drama that does not rely on realism, but also the most international of American playwrights, the most in conversation with Pirandello and Aubé and Giraudoux and all these European playwrights of his time who rely on meta-theatricality and on conventions from Greek theater that they bring back to, they bring forward to the modern era. And that's definitely something that I think is inscribed in the heart of his writing and the way he handles the craft of theater. Actually, this year is not just Wilder's birthday, it's also Molière's 400th anniversary. And I was thinking of Molière's saying about the theater that to write a play, all you need is a stage and a passion. And Wilder actually picks up on that, saying that our town, you know, the climax of our town only needs a few square feet of boarding and the passion to know what life means to us. So really, I see his inspiration as very much transatlantic.
Fascinating. I mean, Tappy, is there a particular production or productions that stick in your mind, just in terms of working with, you know, Wilder's conception of the bare stage and the way that the play is kind of a memory play? I mean, as Julie was saying, I mean, it's 19 1901 scene from 1938. It's very clear about that. So in some ways, the whole tissue of the action is kind of evanescent and something we're meant to think of as, you know, a vision or a memory or a dream in some way. Are there productions you feel that you recall in your many, many years of seeing the play that have been particularly effective in bringing that to life?
Yes, it's true. I've seen a great many productions of our town. I don't have the greatest memory in the world. Maybe that's a good thing or not. I don't know. But I think it's fair to say that I too, I was in a production in high school.
Mm.
So I know, I have a little sense of what it was like, you know, to mount it as hundreds of schools have done in often rather primitive, now increasingly fancy setting, but in the gym, in the school gym, you know, that's where a great many Americans encounter it for the first time. I played the professor, by the way, Max, and I have very strong views about how the professor's role should be played as a result of that, and partly from the mistakes I made. And but we're talking about a very different period now in the play's history, where professionals discovering its profound depths, its toughness,
Mhm.
and this extraordinary dialogue between the commonplace, so-called commonplace moments of our lives, and the tension of what is real, what survives. And you hear that line about all those millions who lived in Babylon, and they're
Right.
gone and forgotten, and there's nothing left. Well, what's it add up to? You can get
Right.
awfully discouraged at our town, as Mrs. Roosevelt did. And I think the productions I remember today deal with that tension and bring it out in a very remarkable way. I saw one on Long Wharf, a theater I was involved in, where they put the names of incredibly important members of that theater on chairs in the third act and just left them bare. And you were reminded of people that the audience knew, for example, very moving. And to see any time theaters use stars, and they can do extraordinary things with lighting now, techniques, to bring the universal element into the play. And frankly, one last example, and enough for me, and that is Michel's production. There was a moment there, Michel, which you might like to speak to, where they invited the audience up to dance at the wedding.
Yeah.
So the audience is now part of the play.
Right.
And then suddenly, as I remember it, and Michel, you can help me because you directed it. And music is being played. I can't remember what music. I don't think it's what I got in the New England Congregational Church. Anyway, people suddenly drift in holding chairs. And then we all left the stage, and the theater, as I remember, it was absolutely dead quiet. And suddenly Act 3 began. And it was a remarkable moment in theater. Michel, am I saying something, or do you remember that moment? You directed it.
Exactly as it was, and I'm very moved that you're mentioning now. I think that was, you know, something that we discovered during the production. You know, Act 2 ends in this wedding, in this extremely festive moment, and Act 3 ends. It begins in the cemetery. So how could we make it even more so? Well, a wedding then deserves a celebration, and you know, and after the wedding, we have live music playing, and we were singing popular songs from the American canon, for the Latin American canon. We spent, you know, instead of having an intermission, we had 10 minutes of inviting the audience to the stage and dancing with them, and maybe giving them a little shot. And just having a really festive, spirited party. And yes, we took everyone out on stage very quickly, very dramatic at the end, and people sat down happy they sat down full of life, and then he hit them like a ton of bricks when the third act began.
That's exactly what happened. It's exactly what happened. And, you know, how do you wring assurance and how do you wring positive stuff out of such a tough play?
Yes.
You know, that's an issue.
Yeah.
I'm not using the words I usually use, but it's a question, because when it's done honestly, it can be a very dark play.
Yes. No, I'm glad you raised that, because I mean, we had several questions from audience members that kind of go to this. You know, Ron Smith from Richmond, Virginia says, how do you respond to the assertion that Our Town is not for adults, but a YA level play? And there's another similar question from Ben Tanner of Mount Airy, Georgia. Could someone speak to the disconnect between the dismissive popular opinion of the play and the profound reactions people have? I think what they're talking about is that combination of the light and the dark in the play. I mean, what Wilder himself called, you know, the microscope and the telescope. He talked about, you know, the revelation of seeing an archaeological site, and that it was both a microscope, you could see what kind of tiles they had in their house, but it was also a telescope because, you know, they were so far away. And the play kind of gives you both those perspectives in a way. It gives you the close-up view and the distance view. And I was going to ask about that. I mean, what's the hardest thing to get right about this play? I mean, you know, as a director, let's just say, or, you know, or as, you know, Julie, when you're involved, what's the hardest note? Just what's the hardest thing about being faithful to Wilder's vision for the play, do you think? I mean, is it what, you know, Tappy's talking about trying to find that balance between the closeness to the characters and the, you know, and the you know, the view from the stars, so to speak?
Well, in terms of translation, the
Yes.
hardest thing definitely was keeping a light touch and really being true to the text without overdoing it, because everything is there. It's very tempting to translate it and make it even more folksy and nostalgic and anchor it somewhere in a new country. And that wouldn't work at all. That would sort of take away from the universality of the play.
Yes.
And I found while translating that I was often troubled I had trouble with the things that didn't trouble me at all when I was reading them, but they were really hard to translate. What are these people doing when they're waiting in the cemetery? Aren't they waiting for the eternal part in them to come out clear?
Yes.
How do you translate that image? Something
Yes.
comes out clear. If you translate it in a very abstract way, it sounds very cold in French. So I had to work around the image. Or we're glad we're all going to the cemetery when our fit's over. Instead of saying when we're done living,
Right.
How do you translate that fit? So I spent a lot of time on those images, so as to find something that spoke truly to the very philosophical simplicity of the text and not overdoing it. That was the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that, because one of the amazing things about Wilder's language, and you were talking about this, you know, this is the way we were in our growing up and our marrying and our living and our dying. You know, it's simple, and yet it's also the King James Bible, and it's also Emily Dickinson, and it has all these resonances which help it bridge those things. And I was going to ask you how you find a language in French that, like, how do you do that? Does that carry over in any way into the French?
Not necessarily the King James Bible and
Yeah.
Emily Dickinson, but you can find resonances, yes, by varying the language. Especially with the stage manager has quite a range, doesn't he? Because he has a lot of folksy humor, and at the same time, these very literary resonances. I did have to add a few notes for the benefit of people reading the play, but that was mostly to elaborate on who William Jennings Bryan is, or things like that, or to identify the reference to the Spoon River anthology. But for the language itself, I did have to navigate between registers And there were some moments when I went for something a little more formal in order to show that there were resonances like this.
Understood. Well, I wanted to actually ask you about moments per second. You know, the play is filled, people have favorite moments in this play. They have favorite lines. They, you know, I mean, one of the things that's amazing about this play is that it seems, you know, to be very simple, and yet it's deeply mysterious. And it's hard to understand how Wilder gets that effect. But there are moments when the apparent simplicity of the play opens up and reveals depths. Like one of my favorite moments, and I tear up every time I even think about this, much less see it performed, is when Emily asks her mother, am I good looking? That moment, because suddenly she's seeing herself from the outside in a way. She's imagining what's the trajectory of my life going to look like, and that opens up into what's coming. But I was wondering, do you have favorite moments or moments that you connect to in the play, lines or moments that mean a lot to you and that you find yourself returning to? Michelle, do you have moments like that in the play that you think about or that you build to in your production, or
I mean, absolutely. I have to say that in this journey of Our Town, I kind of had a very fancy Virgil to come in the journey with me. Is that one of my mentors and one of the people I've called when I had issues with was Gregory Mosher.
Mm-hmm.
I think Our Town really owes a lot to his production, his Lincoln Center production. I think that was kind of, a pivotal moment for the modern notion of Our Town, of how profound and marvelous this piece is. But anyway, I just want to say, Gregory pointed something out to me that I had not noticed when I was first working on it. He said, well, look at the wedding, he said. Like, that's pure Wilder genius. Instead of having the event of the wedding at the wedding, it happens in the beat just before, right? So that's when Emily is getting nervous and George is getting nervous.
Great scene.
And then and then Mr. Webb comes in. It's like, come on, you guys love each other. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And that is the wedding. And then we do the ritual. And he doesn't care about the ritual. Then we have a woman gossiping on the background, etc. And that's genius, right? Like the ritual is it's of less important, but that moment of humans agreeing on something, it's so beautiful, and it happened before the wedding. That it's genius. Yeah. I think discovering that moment was very impactful.
I have to say, I think one of the brilliant moments in your production was the scene where George freaks out and says, I don't want to grow up, and I'm not ready. I just want to be one of the guys. And his, mother says to him, basically pull yourself together. And what's interesting about it in your version is that that's not done in English. That's done in the family's own language. And it's as if to say, we don't do that in our family. We have dignity. There's a kind of ethnic dignity in that scene, which I had never occurred. It made me think about the scene completely differently. So anyway, I thought it was wonderful. You talked about the celebration scene, which is the other interesting thing. one thing that's interesting at the play is the role of kind of hymns and rituals and church. And Wilder said he wanted there's hymns sung in every act, right? There's the choir practice, and then there's the wedding, and then there's the funeral. Wilder said he wanted the play bathed in that sound, the way that Green Pastures was bathed in the sound of Negro spirituals. And it points to this idea of what the role of the community kind of as a kind of chorus is. And you, Michelle, changed that a bit by making it a kind of a kind of party scene, which made a lot of sense in that context. But I wonder, how does that translate? I mean, Julie, and in the productions, Tabby, that you've seen, I mean, we're not in a world which is, a 90% Protestant church going, anymore. And I wonder, does that idea still come through? The idea that somehow the foundation of this whole play is the surrounding community. And how do you think about that? What is the role of the community in this play? I guess I should have warned you that one was coming.
The community is essential, and something that I thought was striking in the most recent French production, where I told you there were only 6 people on stage, is it really came through even with fewer actors. In terms of the hymns, I translated all of them into French, working with the music so that it would fit, but they didn't use them. And I don't know that a production ever will. In other translations that I've done, I tend to both translate and give a French equivalent, just to give an idea, because not only is this sort of a more modern and probably less religious time, but also France is mostly Catholic, or was mostly Catholic and not Protestant. So the whole speech about the different churches doesn't translate really well.
Right.
You have to kind of explain it. But the sense of community, and especially singing together on stage and harmonizing, I've seen that in every production of Our Town that I've seen, and it always creates moments of strong emotion to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that question. It's but I can observe that the world has changed enormously since 1938. Families are fractured. We hear as the American family is fractured, and yet. The ritual acts which are expressed in this play have proved to be timeless.
Mhm.
And I think what is rather beautiful about the play today, I think it's in its golden age. You had a questioner asked you, Max, about the high school productions. Well, I think you have to go see high school productions to realize how extraordinary the timelessness and depth of this play, because in high schools today aren't easy places. It's raw. Life is raw. And this play translates beautifully because of the situation we're in. For everybody. What I am dazzled by the fact, I don't see a lot of high school productions, but I hear about it. Somebody is killed in an automobile accident. They're familiar with death in a way that another generation wasn't. You can't dumb this play down anywhere.
Right.
And another extraordinary thing, and I sense this whenever I go to productions, is you have a generation of people revisiting a work who might have had ideas about it in their head, and they come out of it and they are in a category I call the G I never knew. The G I never knew. They come out, and that happened in New York with a Cromer production. There were older people who said, gee, I never knew. They knew the play, but gee, they never knew. And they come out shattered by the experience, and they go back and see it again. There were a number of people who saw that production in New York 2 or 3 times.
Right. That's really interesting. Okay, I just wanted to ask you quickly a couple other things. I'm curious about the stage manager character, who is a very interesting character because, as Julie was saying, he's got a range. On the one hand, he's kind of this homey, cracker barrel Yankee philosopher, but by the end of the play, you realize something else is going on. He's almost a supernatural figure. He seems to be this boundary figure between life and death. I mean, he's the one Emily turns to and says, I can go back, can I? I can go back and revisit that world, can't I? And he smiles and nods, So I'm curious about how you see that character, and also how do you play him on the stage? Do you play him warm and folksy? Do you play him cool and powerful, as someone who's pulling all the strings of life behind the scenes. I mean, Michelle, as a director, how do you think about that? How do you think about how to play that character?
Right. It's so interesting because that character completely defines the tone of the show.
Mm.
Right. And I was always very, again, going back to that Center production with Spalding Gray, Gregory Mosher, I think that opened something for the show. When you suddenly have somebody like Spalding Gray with that cynical approach to it, suddenly everything felt different, right? I think that our production, had a man with a very big heart.
Yes.
But also somebody who felt unafraid to take some distance and have a colder approach when necessary.
Yeah.
I definitely think that your stage manager, your Emily and your George will define the production. And you need somebody who is able to really, for the stage manager, take those words, make it their own, and give that point of view, which, although subtle, can have extraordinary effect in the tone of the show.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Julie, I'm curious about it. And I mean, he's such a Yankee character in a certain way. He says little, kind of the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot going on underneath. Does that connect with something in French? How does he come through in a French production? Does he seem like some other kind of French character? I mean, he's not like the Yankee character, obviously, but.
No, he didn't. I have a clear image of the actor who was playing him, Guillaume Lalonde, and he did not seem like a Yankee character at all. It really, really worked. But that's what, the reactions to the play in the 40s, in the 60s, and in 2016, when it was done again, are always the same. We connect. This town is like a French town. We know the characters. And the stage manager, he was dressed all in black. He was a little mysterious, very young, younger than the other ones I've seen. He was also playing George, since all the characters were doubled. And he kind of played on the mysterious thing. And it really, really worked, giving him, because he was so young, I guess that's where he found the depth and the distance to have some cynical and ironic elements, and not just be somebody who's like talking to the audience and all jolly. And I really like what he did with the details of the lines. There's a line I never thought of before. Nice town, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Nobody ever, very remarkable, ever came out of it, as far as we know. And he paused before, as far as we know, and sort of looked at the audience, as far as we know. And it made you think, so what if all the people are actually remarkable? What if it's a different definition of remarkable? It was wonderful. And one more thing I'd like to say about the stage manager is I love that he's called the stage manager, not the author, the director, the philosopher, but something technical. And he's the one with all the keys. And I just love that.
That's great. That's great. So Tappy, I'm going to pick up on something that you were talking about. John Guare said about the play that what it's about is the sweeping up of the commonplace into the realm of the eternal, which is a pretty good short way of describing the play. And Brooks Atkinson, in his review of the play, wrote that in the deepest sense of the word, our town is a religious play, he said. And I mean, do you see it that way?
I think I do. In a secular age, I mean, there's a certain spiritual quality to it. And you have to have faith to move forward in this crazy world of ours. Because what is very clear is, and thanks to the younger scholars who say this, and people like Mark Robinson, and those of us who know the play well, know that the loving irony at the core of it is, it's not gee, if we only learned to smell the flowers, we'd all be happier. The problem is we don't even have time to smell the flowers. It's bias before when we think about it. That's the loving irony in this play, that and the speed with which things are moving. Jacob Gallagher Ross has written a wonderful piece about, and nothing ever changes around here. Are you kidding? This town is spinning through space. And how do you get a foothold? And it has questions of faith which you can interpret in a secular way are very much part of it. And if we wish to describe them as religious, I think it's okay.
Would either Julie or Michelle want to comment on that?
Yeah. I would.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I agree.
You have to agree with me, Julie. You don't, I'll love you anyway. You don't-
No, I agree with that. And I would also say that it's a sense of ritual, because the play is so much about repetition. And perhaps looping back to what somebody was asking about this being a young adult play, I think I used to love the play. When I was 15, I loved the play for the second act and the love story. Then I loved it for the first act, and how it helps us to, entices us to look at things that are commonplace in a different light. And now I really truly love it for the third act, because it's about rehearsing for loss and the fact that that's what theater does. I think as a theater scholar, I'm more and more drawn to plays that really are about how theater works. And our town does that wonderfully. So.
That's very good. I mean, part of the reason I asked that is because, Tappy has noted in his introduction to the paperback edition of Our Town that theaters have turned to Our Town in the wake of traumatic events. That's one of the things that's happened in the last few years. But Manchester is one example. The production following the 9/11 here is another. And I'm, and Tappy, maybe you're probably familiar with other examples as well, but I'm curious about why you think that is. I mean, that is to say, a town in Northern England turns to art, an American play from 1938 as a way to, bring the community, or try to bring the community back together after this horrific event. And I'm wondering just if you could just think about, reflect on, because you know the play so well. I mean, why do you think that is? I mean, why do they turn to it? And what work does it do, I guess, or something like that? I don't know. Tappy, do you have thoughts about that?
It's a wonderful question, and it gets to the heart of what I think is my uncle's genius in somehow posing questions in a way that are timeless. And I can't go too much beyond that. I mean, I would like to stand here and raise a flag and fire a 21 gun salute. And I do so, I think, to an artist who raises the timeless questions. And in the period in which we live, we've kind of cleaned the stage, and we're looking for people who can do that in a fresh way. And it turns out that he can, and the play is still fresh for that reason. But I step back now in favor of those who produce it and who've translated it and lived with it, who don't trust me. I'm the author's nephew. I really believe this play is going to be around for a long time. And perhaps they can address that better than I can.
Thanks, Tappy. Michelle, Julie, you have any thoughts about that? About the work of the play in the wake of a traumatic event in a community, or
Sure. And it's not just the play. I think that the artistic exploration of Thornton Wilder in, Bridge of St. Louis Rey. That's another example of, is this books, or is this story about life in colonial Peru? Or is this story about the frailty of the human experience, right? And that is even That isn't even a work that is so clearly, both of them are about the untimely death of people, right? Our Town is about burying almost a child, right? A young mother. And Bridge of St. Louis Ray is about 6 people. Is it 6, Tapi? 6 people. 5.
It doesn't
I
matter.
exaggerate always, so that's my 10% there. But about 5 people who suddenly lose their lives when a bridge collapsed.
Yes.
And it's always this, trying to make sense of life, right? That's kind of the exploration, is trying to make sense of things. And I think the greatness of it is that he doesn't tell us, oh, I made sense of everything and here's the answer. It's this journey of questions that will live in your mind constantly as soon as you finish the book, or as soon as you finish seeing the play, is that it raises so many questions about what it is to be alive that will just live rent-free in your mind forever.
Something else we could say is also that I think Our Town is a play about mourning in many ways. You don't see Emily die, you see her funeral, and you see her going back to the living in her memory and then dying again. So as an audience member, you mourn for her twice, and then you see her husband lying down at the foot of her grave, and that's the final heartrending image of the play. And the original function of theater, going back to Greek theater one again, is to give voice to the dead, let the dead speak on the stage. And I think Our Town does that with the third act, and it's a great mourning play. And I think in traumatic moments, we need that. We need to go to the theater to visit our dead. And then as a community, I think it's something that theater is helpful with.
Yes, that's well said. Tapi, I guess a last question, kind of just following this thread, that I kind of wanted to ask you. So your uncle died in December 1975. In his biography, it's noted that at the graveside, his brother, Amos Wilder, the Reverend Amos Wilder, said of him, he realized life while he lived it and brought incomparable visions to all experiences and relationships, which is in some ways a reference to the play. And at the memorial service a month later, the congregation sang "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds," which is the hymn that is sung in all 3 acts of Our Town. And it makes me wonder, from your point of view, how personal a statement is the play? I mean, or a testament, I would almost say, of your uncle's understanding of things and of who he was.
I think the autobiographical elements are profound in all my uncle's work, but they're not obvious. They're not buried. But I think Our Town is a profound statement about where Wilder was, is, and is today for us. A great many of the lines are from his family experience, just a kind of aside. And thank you for that reference, Max, to the graveside ceremony and my father's tribute to his brother. I think very profound. And Penny Niven gets at this in an extraordinary way in her biography, but most people don't realize it, how autobiographical in terms of the questions where he was and what he was addressing, what he was thinking about, and then how he could dramatize them. A very profound and important question. Thank you. Observation, and thank you for asking it, Max. It's hard for me to talk about it without tearing up, I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, I think we probably should leave it there. Very grateful to the 3 of you for joining us this evening for a really wonderful conversation. There's a lot more we could talk about. As we've been talking, some of the audience members have been putting their favorite lines in the chat. I don't know if you can see that. Ma isn't the moonlight terrible is one of them, and that's a pretty good line. You know, the other, you know, I think I'll choose the day when George and I first realized we were in love. How could that be a sad day? Is another one. But I guess those are the subject for another evening. But thank you very, very much. You've been listening to Julie Betancourt-Deer, Michelle Hausman, and Tappan Wilder discuss Our Town, which is published in Thornton Wilder's Collected Plays and Writings on Theater, volume number 172 in the Library of America series. Please join us for forthcoming online events from Library of America. On May 12, LOA Live welcomes Maxine Hung Kingston in conversation with Viet Thanh Nguyen, an exploration of Kingston's life and work to mark publication of a definitive edition of her writing in the Library of America series. On Thursday, June 9th, acclaimed poet and best-selling champion of poetry, Edward Hirsch, joins us to discuss The Heart of American Poetry, his revelatory and deeply moving new book about the poems that have changed his life and how our poetic tradition is at its heart a passionate conversation about American democracy. Details about this and upcoming LOA Live events can be found on our website, loa.org, where you'll also find information about Library of America's Thornton Wilder, Maxine Hung Kingston, and Heart of American Poetry volumes, and links to purchase those and other editions of Great American Writing. You'll also find recordings of tonight's and previous LOA Live events. Thanks so much again to Tappan Wilder, Michelle Hausman, and Julie Vatin, and have a great evening.